Carl? Yeah, there's a problem with the helix on this one.
Okay, where's the paperwork?
It's right there.
All right, we'll take them into customer service. Hi, Jackie. Here's some more impressions for you to call on.
Okay, thanks. Unfortunately, the impression for Mr. Cartwright is voided in the helix area, and in order to do the best job for you, we really do need a new impression.
This program was created to assist the hearing healthcare professional in an area that doesn't receive near the attention it deserves: how to make a quality impression of the ear. In fact, that's the very foundation of the work that we do, whether it be for an expensive set of in-the-ear instruments or something as simple as swim plugs for one of our kids heading off to summer camp. The techniques presented in this video reflect what we've learned over the past 4 decades. This has allowed us to evaluate over 5 million impressions of the human ear. These techniques can create a finished impression that would pass the scrutiny of any ear mold laboratory or hearing instrument manufacturer. Basic to the hearing healthcare industry is the need to make a good impression of both the outer ear as well as the external auditory canal. The quality of the impression will directly affect the satisfaction level your patients will experience. Everyone loses when the impression quality and accuracy is compromised, and frustration for all is guaranteed. We're going to provide a concise review of the basic techniques for making a good impression of the ear, and we'll help you navigate around some of the areas that are common in making the finished impression less than ideal. By following a few fundamental steps, you'll be able to ensure effectiveness and comfort for your patient and have fewer frustrations for yourself. Just as artists use special tools and techniques to bring their visions to life, you likewise have specific tools and techniques that you can use to create excellent ear impressions. You must first conduct a thorough examination of the patient's ear and ear canal prior to making an impression. There are many fine products on the market for viewing the ear, from inexpensive direct view otoscopes to elaborate video otoscopes. Regardless of which you use, the ear must be both clean and healthy before any impression is taken. Let's limit ourselves to the techniques of impression taking and pick up the process after the ear has been determined acceptable for impressioning. Have your work area set up and ready to go. Your impression material should be handy along with all the tools that you'll need. It's best to assume your patient has never had an impression taken before. As such, a little explanation can go a long way toward patient relaxation. Talk to your patient. Explain what you're doing and what is to be accomplished. Instill a feeling of confidence in your professional abilities. The purpose of the ear dam is to provide an endpoint determining the ear canal length of the impression and to prevent the impression material from coming into contact with the eardrum. An undersized dam will allow impression material to flow past the dam or push the dam too deeply in the canal, creating an uncomfortable situation for both the impression taker and the patient. An oversized dam will either abnormally expand the ear canal or be too large to place as deep in the canal as desired. There are no readily available gauges for measuring, so do not be afraid to try several different sizes of dams before selecting the proper size. Before placing the canal block or ear dam in the ear canal, be certain that the thread is firmly attached to the dam. If the dam doesn't adhere to the cured impression material and the thread isn't securely attached, it could remain in the ear after the impression is removed. Use an illuminated ear light to aid in placing the dam to the proper depth. Place the canal block at the entrance to the ear canal. Note how the little finger is braced against the side of the head. This steadies the hand for block placement and protects against sudden movement by the patient that could be caused by a tickle or a cough reflex. Place the tip of the ear light in the center of the block. Gently guide the block into place, at least to the second bend. Some custom ear products, such as the popular musician's earplugs and CIC instruments, require an impression that extends fully to the bony portion of the ear. Never scrimp on canal length. An impression received by the laboratory that is too long for the requested style of ear mold or hearing instrument is cause for celebration. However, the lab can never accurately extend the length of a short impression. Once the proper size canal block has been inserted, we are ready to mix the ear impression material. What type of impression material should you use? Traditional powder and liquid, or one of the many silicone products on the market? Which is the most effective, the easiest to use, the most professional? Unfortunately, there are no simple answers. Often the answer depends on the type of material your supplier stocks. In reality, each material has its advantages and drawbacks. Without a doubt, traditional powder and liquid materials will produce a beautiful, extremely accurate impression with no distortion of the ear, if mixed in the proper proportions and syringed into the ear with correct timing and technique. That's a big if. To help avoid any problems with your powder and liquid mixture, use only pre-measured units of material. The few cents per ear you may save by buying powder in a bag like sugar and liquid in a quart jar will be eaten up many times over as a result of bad impressions due to the impression mixture not being accurate. An ear impression made with silicone material retains a highly accurate dimensional stability. However, as stable as silicone material is, it is capable of expanding the ear sufficiently to create an ill-fitting instrument or ear mold. Check with your impression material supplier for specific instructions and information regarding the use of the material they supply. Again, we always recommend that you use only pre-measured powder and liquid materials. The use of a glass mixing bowl and metal spatula prevents any absorption of the liquid into a wooden tool such as a tongue depressor. Place the entire contents of the liquid vial into the mixing bowl. Then add the contents of the powder vial. Using a metal or plastic spatula, stir the mix until the powder is totally saturated. Once you begin mixing, the curing has also begun. Don't delay. Use the spatula and place the mixture into the barrel of the syringe and insert the plunger. Don't worry about those little bits of trapped air. If injected properly, these will self-eliminate. Depress the plunger until the material begins to flow from the syringe tip. You are now ready to inject the material into the ear. But before we actually shoot impressions, let's take a look at how silicone impression material is mixed. Note the different type of syringe that is used for silicone impression material. This unique design aids in the flow of the material and is easier to use with smaller hands. Do not use powder and liquid impression material in this type of syringe. The materials are incompatible and it will ruin your silicone syringe. Prior to mixing the silicone, prepare the syringe to accept the material. Disassemble the syringe. Note how the sleeve on the plunger slides up and down or forward. Move the sleeve to the extreme end of the plunger. You will feel a detent or hear a click. Set the syringe aside with the barrel and mix the impression material. While it may be acceptable to use your hands to mix impression material, we prefer the wax palette and spatula method, or spleed method, for its cleanliness and professionalism. Open a 50-50 material package and use a metal spatula to place the material on the spleed pad. Mix the two components together like an artist would mix paint. Remember, one of the goals of the spleed method is to not touch the material with your hands. Continue mixing the material until the color is uniform. Load the mixture into the large chamber of the syringe barrel by using a cookie cutter action. Grip the plunger just behind the sleeve that has been fully extended. This sleeve will force the material into the narrow portion of the barrel, and it should seat firmly against the bottom of the large chamber. Depress the plunger slightly to start the material flowing through the syringe. Addition cure material is mixed the same way. Measure the base material according to the manufacturer's specifications and place it on the spleed pad. Use the same measuring process for the accelerator you would use if mixing by hand. In this case, the length of the scoop. Mix the material until it is uniform in color and load it into the large chamber of the syringe barrel. The impression is the cornerstone of a good fitting earpiece. When a new house is to be built, one of the first things done is to survey the particular building site so that the foundation can be engineered for those particular requirements. If this isn't done properly, the effects are all too apparent when the new home is built. Taking an impression of the ear is not unlike creating that good foundation. If the impression that we work from is not properly made, the effects are all too apparent to the end user, your patient. Just as the builder uses the architect's plans to work from, the ear mold technician uses the impression as his blueprint from which to make the earpieces. The impression material is properly mixed and placed in the syringe, and you are ready to make the impression. When first entering the ear with the syringe tip, it is a good idea to gently pull up and back on the patient's pinna to help straighten the auditory canal. This will maximize penetration of the syringe and help minimize the distance the impression material has to travel before it begins to retreat from the canal. As soon as the material begins to flow from the syringe, Release the pinna. Assuming the material has been mixed properly, it will flow deep into the ear canal, come to rest against the canal block, and finally reverse direction and attempt to push out past the syringe tip. At the moment the material begins to creep past the tip, gently begin to move out of the ear canal with the tip of the syringe. Take your time, both in retreating from the ear canal as well as in dispensing material from the syringe. A smooth, steady release of the material, coordinated with movement of the syringe tip, will prevent wrinkles, worms, voids, or other imperfections. When the canal is filled, slowly begin to move up the rear of the concha bowl area. As the syringe tip approaches the anti-helix area, begin to tilt the syringe barrel so that the material can begin to flow up into the helix lock area. Caution, this is an area of the impression that is easy to distort with too much pressure. Perhaps it would be helpful to think of the syringe as a spray tip from a can of spray paint. As you see here, it would be necessary to move the spray can in quite a few different directions in order to paint all of the undercuts and recessed areas of the ears. The same holds true with the syringe tip. You have to move it around a bit to fill all of the areas in the ear. When the helix area is filled, move slowly down the front of the ear, taking care to fill the anti-tragus area completely. Throughout the impressioning process, it should appear that the syringe tip is moving around a 1/4 inch round fluid mass just by being in the center of it. At this point, slowly move the syringe to just below the center of the ear and unload it as necessary to provide the bulk needed. Note that the bowl of the ear should be nearly filled from the previous movement up the rear of the bowl and down the front edge of the ear. This bulk provides the laboratory with the reference points they need to create the ear mold. Concentric circles and a relatively flat outer surface should be your goal. These are the usual indicators of proper impression technique. Now let's see that again in real time. Notice how the syringe tip isn't allowed to pull away from the material. Also notice the movement of the syringe relative to the fixed position of the head. If the amount of material used in the outer ear is sufficient without being excessive, it won't create excessive weight and cause sag in the finished impression. As a bonus, an impression made in this manner will always have a flat mailing surface. Don't touch the ear or the impression material. Don't try to create a tighter fit by pressing material into the patient's ear. Don't support the tragus with one finger while pushing in on the canal area with another. Don't smooth the outer surface by hand to aid in chipping. All of these things work against the laboratory and will result in a poor fit. In other words, leave well enough alone. Encourage your patient to act naturally. The old school required the patient to sit absolutely still while the impression material cured. This is great for a post-mortem fitting. Have the patient talk, smile, chew, move around as they would in their daily lives. This will make the impression as accurate as possible. Still not convinced? Try this simple test. Place your little finger in your ear canal as deeply as you safely can and chew. Feel that action? If you do not allow for this in the impression process, the ear mold can dislodge easily, allow feedback, or just be a loose fit. By now, the impression material is probably cured. It typically takes 7 to 10 minutes. The easiest way to check if the impression is ready to remove is to indent the outer surface with an object like the otoprobe tip. If the indentation remains, the impression is not quite ready to remove. If, however, the indentation disappears when the pressure is released, the impression is ready to remove. First, gently tug on the pinna to break any seal that may have formed in the outer ear. Next, release the helix lock area. Then with a forward and outward movement, carefully remove the impression from the ear. It helps to have the patient open and close their mouth while removing the impression. This releases any possible vacuum. Do not pull the impression suddenly from the ear. Don't use the thread attached to the impression to aid in removing the impression. This can cause distortion of the canal area. Examine the ear for any materials remaining from the process. If the ear cannot be easily cleaned, refer the patient for appropriate treatment. Inspect the impression to make sure you are perfectly satisfied with what you have just done. If for any reason you're not completely satisfied with the impression, now is the time to take a second one. The minimal cost in materials and time could easily prevent a phone call from your laboratory requesting a second impression. Chances are your patient won't know that taking 2 impressions is anything other than standard procedure. Here are a few common problems we see with impressions that come into our laboratories. On this impression, the material never came into contact with the canal dam, if there even was one in place. With nothing to stop the flow of impression material, the canal is typically underfilled. The wormy look you see on this impression is caused by the syringe tip not being kept embedded in the impression material. While this method works well for cake decorating, it's not very desirable for an ear impression. Voids in the impression, such as this one made of silicone, are easy to spot. Notice the shiny area where the material was allowed to cure in direct contact with air. To be sure they got their money's worth, the dispenser used all of the impression material available for this ear. This created too much weight in the outer ear and caused a distortion or drooping of the outer surface. On the other side of the fence, this impression was made by a very frugal person trying to get 2 ears worth from one impression unit. The landmarks that are critical to the technicians making the earpiece are entirely absent from this impression. Silicone impressions can be shipped loose in the mailing box. This can be disastrous, however, for impressions made of powder and liquid mix. This is where you realize the payoff from the flat surface you created in the outer ear. You can use this area to secure the impression to the bottom of the box with a product like Duco household cement. The order form can then be folded and placed in the box in such a manner that it does not come into contact with the impression while in transit. Well, there you have it. Now the best set of ear impressions ever can be on the way to your ear mold laboratory or hearing instrument manufacturer. You know, quite often when asked for a second set of impressions, they are always good impressions. So why not send that second set first? Well, that covers the methods and techniques behind the art of making a good impression. We hope that some of what we've learned over the past years is helpful to you. Remember, the things to keep in mind are to always use a high-quality, pre-measured impression material. Make sure the ear dam or cotton block is properly sized and positioned in the ear canal. Mix the materials according to the manufacturer's instructions. Take your time syringing the material and have your patient move their head, chew, smile, and talk. Inspect the finish impression and make sure that you're satisfied with it before you send it to the lab. If you're in doubt, now is the time to take the second impression while your patient is still in your office. An artist would never consider signing off on their work if it wasn't their best. Likewise, they wouldn't expect the recipient to just fake in the imperfections or other areas that need special attention. Custom fitting products to the ear is an art all by itself. And with each new fitting that begins with an impression of the ear is your opportunity as the artist to create a masterpiece.